Shattered Secrets. December 2006. The holiday lights shimmered in the reflections on the glass walls of the office skyscraper where the Christmas party was being held. Michael Rivers, holding a glass of champagne tightly in his hand, surveyed the crowd of guests, investment bankers, financiers, and their partners, all dressed in couture. His wife, Emily, stood off to the side, discussing something with a group of colleagues from the analytics department. She always stood out in such gatherings, not only because of her refined beauty, but also due to her sharp mind and intuition, qualities highly valued in their circles. As he approached, Michael caught a snippet of their conversation. One of Emily's colleagues was enthusiastically talking about a new project, investments in mortgage-backed securities, MBS, that supposedly promised unprecedented returns. Emily listened in silence, but her expression showed that she wasn't impressed. "No, I'm not getting involved," she said firmly, when all eyes turned to her. "The market is overheated, and I believe it's going to crash in the next few years. The risk is too high." Some laughed, others shook their heads, but no one argued. Emily wasn't known for being wrong. Michael sensed that the conversation was bothering her, and when the guests shifted to another topic, he gently took her by the elbow and led her aside. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly once they were out of earshot. Emily looked him in the eye, and there was a hint of anxiety in her gaze that he hadn't noticed before. She simply nodded, as if she didn't want to discuss it here, surrounded by her colleagues. They returned home late that night. While Emily was changing, Michael poured them both a glass of whiskey and sat by the window, gazing out at the dark streets below. He could sense that this party had left a deeper impression on her than usual. "Do you really think things are that bad?" he asked as she joined him. Emily sighed and sank onto the couch beside him. She remained silent for a long time, staring into her glass of amber liquid before finally speaking. "It's more than just a hunch, Michael," she said. "I see the numbers, the analyses. Everything points to one big, dangerous puzzle. The real estate market is about to collapse. I don't want us caught up in it." Her words cut through Michael like a knife. He trusted her intuition, but the realization of the looming threat wasn't easy to accept. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Emily met his gaze, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm quitting my job. We need to leave New York before it all falls apart. Let's start fresh somewhere else, away from all of this." Michael knew Emily didn't say things like this lightly. If she said it, it meant the situation was serious. Despite the fear of the unknown, he agreed. Together, they decided to leave everything behind and move to Asheville, a small town in North Carolina, where they hoped to find a new life and escape the impending catastrophe. As Michael lay down to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It was as if something darker and more dangerous awaited them, hidden in the shadows of this decision. Asheville, North Carolina, greeted them with the quiet harmony of mountain landscapes and the coziness of a small town where life moved at a slower, more measured pace. Michael and Emily quickly settled into this new world. In their small but comfortable house, surrounded by forest, they felt the peace they had longed for, a peace that had been missing in the hustle and bustle of New York. Michael found a job with a local construction company that specialized in designing and building upscale homes. This job was a welcome change for him, far less stressful than his previous position in New York. He enjoyed the physical work, the smell of fresh wood, and the sound of tools at work. Working with his hands allowed him to forget, to escape the worries and thoughts about the looming crisis. Emily took a position at a small brokerage firm that specialized in local real estate. Her sharp mind and experience quickly made her a valuable asset to the company. She helped clients choose the best options analyzing the market with the same attention to detail she had in New York. But Michael noticed a change in her behavior. She no longer discussed her work with him as she used to. More and more often, she withdrew into herself, lost in her thoughts. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house, Michael finally decided to ask her about what had been bothering him for some time. "Emily, you've changed," he said cautiously. "It's like you're always preoccupied with something. What's going on?" Emily looked at him as if she had been expecting this question. She was silent for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I just want to be sure we made the right choice," she said quietly. "I can't shake the feeling that something could still go wrong. We left everything behind, but problems might catch up with us, even here." Michael felt that this was only part of the truth, but he didn't push her. He knew Emily wouldn't talk until she was ready. Still, her silence worried him. It reminded him of that night when she first spoke of the real estate market crash. Soon, their lives seemed more or less peaceful. Work, occasional meetings with neighbors, walks in the scenic surroundings. All of this helped them forget what they had left behind. But this illusion of peace could not last forever. A few months later, on a cold winter evening, Emily returned home later than usual. She was unusually animated, her eyes bright with excitement. "Michael, I need to talk to you," she said, the moment she stepped through the door. Michael immediately sensed something new in her voice. He put down the book he was reading and looked at his wife attentively. "Did something happen?" he asked. Emily sat down across from him, leaning in slightly closer. "I met someone at work," she began. "His name is Jack Wells. He's an experienced investment advisor, and he has a very interesting proposal." Michael tensed, recalling the party where it had all begun. "What kind of proposal?" he asked, trying to hide his unease. Emily explained to him about the rights to extract natural gas in North Carolina. She explained that this could be their chance to secure their future by investing a portion of their savings in the project. According to her, Jack was confident in its success, and his recommendation seemed sound. "I think we should give it a try," Emily concluded. "This could be our new opportunity." Michael remained silent for a long time, weighing what he had heard. He saw the determination in her eyes, the energy and resolve in her voice. She believed in this. But deep inside, something warned him, as if an inner voice was screaming at him not to give in to temptation. "Okay," he said slowly, deciding to trust her intuition one last time. "But be careful, Emily. I want us to do this together and be prepared for any consequences." She nodded, smiling at him gratefully. But he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something dark and dangerous was beginning to cloud their lives once again. Several weeks had passed since Emily told Michael about Jack Wells's proposal. Michael couldn't shake his feelings of unease, but he decided to trust his wife. He knew her investment instincts were rarely wrong. Yet a new element had entered their lives: Jack Wells, a man Michael knew nothing about. Emily was spending more and more time at work, citing important meetings and negotiations. Michael tried not to dwell on it, but each day his anxiety grew. It felt like a wall was building between them, one he couldn't seem to break through. Emily avoided talking about the project in detail, and she seemed increasingly distant. One evening, when Emily once again returned home late, Michael couldn't hold back any longer and asked her directly, "Emily, are you sure we're moving in the right direction? This project, do you really believe in it?" Emily looked at him, and something flickered in her eyes, but it quickly vanished. "Of course I do, Michael," she replied, her smile a bit strained. "It's just a big project, and we need to consider all the risks. But if it works out, this could be our ticket to financial freedom." Michael wanted to ask more questions, but he didn't. He knew pressing her would only increase the tension between them. Still, the growing unease gnawed at him. It reminded him of that fateful night when she first spoke of the impending real estate market crash. A few days later, Michael accidentally overheard Emily on a phone call. She was talking to Jack, and the tone of her voice was too familiar, almost intimate. A sudden wave of jealousy washed over him, and dark thoughts began to surface. At that moment, Michael started to suspect that something more than just business was going on between Emily and Jack. That evening, he suggested they go out for dinner, but Emily declined, citing yet another important meeting. Left alone, Michael found himself lost in thoughts about what might really be happening. It felt like all their past efforts and decisions were beginning to unravel. One night, while Emily slept soundly, Michael couldn't resist the urge to check her phone. He found several messages from Jack, the content of which left him shocked. The messages were ambiguous, but clearly hinted at something more than just a business relationship. The thought that his wife and Jack were plotting something against him blazed through his mind. As he pondered this, Michael began to feel trapped. He couldn't believe that Emily, whom he had always considered a reliable partner, could be part of a conspiracy. The idea that their marriage had been a lie, that his trust had been betrayed, consumed him. The next day, Michael decided to take action. He left work early and drove to Jack's house. Sneaking inside, he began searching for any evidence to confirm his suspicions. What he found shook him to the core: a diary in which Jack detailed his plan to eliminate Michael and seize his assets. Michael realized the situation was far more serious than he had imagined. This was not just an affair. It was a plan to destroy his life. Now he knew he had to prepare for a fight for his survival. Not only did he need to expose the conspiracy, but he also had to devise a plan for revenge. A plan that would end this treacherous game once and for all. The days dragged on slowly, as if time itself had decided to pause in anticipation of something inevitable. Michael felt his life changing, though he couldn't quite understand in which direction. His suspicions about Emily's betrayal gnawed at him constantly, but the evidence was still too thin to make any decisive moves. Meanwhile, Emily continued to act as if everything was normal. She worked late, came home tired, but always maintained an outward calm. However, Michael knew that her coldness wasn't accidental. Their conversations grew shorter, and moments of intimacy became rare and strained. It seemed as if she was living in a different world, one to which Michael had no access. One evening, when Emily once again returned home late, Michael decided to take matters into his own hands. He went into her office to search for any information that might shed light on what was really happening. In her desk, he found a folder of documents, including income reports, papers on gas extraction rights, and several contracts signed by Jack Wells. Among these papers, his attention was drawn to a strange note with an indecipherable code and the initials JW. Michael pondered over it. The code clearly meant something, but what exactly remained a mystery. He took a photo of the note with his phone and put all the papers back. As he returned to the living room, he felt as though he was getting closer to the truth, but something crucial still eluded him. A few days later, Emily announced that she had to go on a trip to another city to discuss the details of the investment project with new partners. Michael sensed this was his chance to uncover the truth. That night, without telling Emily, he took time off from work. He decided to follow her. When Emily left Asheville, Michael trailed her car at a safe distance along the dark roads. He didn't know where she was headed, but he was certain it would be a meeting with Jack. Soon they arrived at a small suburban motel on the outskirts of a neighboring city, where Emily parked her car and headed to one of the rooms. Michael stopped nearby, watching everything unfold. His heart pounded so hard, he thought its beats could be heard from miles away. A few minutes later, Jack Wells emerged from a nearby car. Rage flared up inside Michael as he watched Jack and Emily enter the room together. His vision blurred with anger as he realized he was witnessing undeniable proof of their betrayal. Unexpectedly, a thought flashed through his mind. He was no longer the only one in danger. Now, he had to act, swiftly and decisively. When Emily and Jack eventually left the motel room, they were unaware that Michael had been watching them from the shadows. He saw them, saw how they held hands, how Jack whispered something into Emily's ear. It took all his willpower not to confront them then and there. Instead, he turned and walked back to his car. He needed to stay focused. There would be a better time to confront them, a time when they would have no escape. Returning home, Michael felt a strange calm. He knew a confrontation was inevitable, but now he had the upper hand. He began gathering everything he needed to expose Jack and Emily's plan. The evidence, the documents, and most importantly, Jack's diary that he had photographed earlier. Michael knew it was time to strike back. He had to move quickly and catch his enemies off guard. The game was just beginning. But this time, Michael was the one setting the rules. Michael hadn't slept for 3 nights in a row. His mind was consumed with thoughts of what he had discovered and what he needed to do next. The tension within him grew like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. All the evidence he had gathered pointed to one conclusion. His wife and Jack Wells were plotting something sinister against him, but their ultimate goal was still unclear. The day after Emily left for another business trip, Michael made a desperate decision. He knew that Jack was not only a cunning manipulator, but also a skilled strategist. The only way to defeat such an opponent was to outmaneuver him in his own game. Michael decided to break into Jack's house to find something that would confirm his worst fears. Jack's house was on the outskirts of the town, surrounded by dense trees, making it an ideal location for seclusion or for hiding secrets. Michael parked a distance away and then carefully crept toward the back door. The night was quiet, with only the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Michael's heart pounded so loudly that he feared even Jack might hear it. Once inside, he moved cautiously to avoid making any noise. The house was filled with expensive furniture, and the walls were adorned with artwork that clearly cost a fortune. But Michael wasn't interested in luxury. His goal was Jack's office, which he found on the 2nd floor. The desk was cluttered with papers, and among them, Michael spotted the diary he had seen before. He carefully flipped through the pages until he came across a detailed plan that left him stunned. Jack wasn't just planning to kill Michael. He had devised a scheme to seize all of his assets. Using forged documents and connections in the financial world, Jack intended to stage Michael's death, then assume his identity as a resurrected partner to take control of everything Michael owned. Worse still, Michael discovered that Jack had already started using his name to purchase property in South Dakota and transfer large sums of money to offshore accounts. Reading the diary was like descending into a nightmare. Jack didn't just want Michael gone. He wanted to erase his entire existence to ensure that Michael would be forgotten by the world. Emily, it seemed, played a crucial role in this scheme, serving as the accomplice who would convince everyone of her husband's accidental death. Gathering all the evidence he needed, Michael left the house as quietly as he had entered, but now he had a clear purpose. He was no longer the victim, but the hunter, ready to strike back. Everything depended on how quickly he could put his plan into action. Back at home, Michael felt an eerie calm. He knew a confrontation with his enemies was inevitable, but now he had the advantage. He was preparing for the moment when all their secrets would be exposed. This was only the beginning, but most importantly, Michael realized that this deadly game wasn't just about money or power. It was a battle for control over his life, his fate, and Michael had no intention of losing. Michael sat in his study, staring at the evidence he had gathered. Photographs of the diary pages, financial reports, documents on real estate. All of it lay spread out on the table before him, like pieces of a puzzle forming a terrifying picture. Now that he had the full scope of what was happening, he understood that his enemies were far more dangerous than he had initially thought. Emily returned home the next day, as calm and composed as ever. She acted as though nothing had changed, but Michael knew that her cold demeanor was just a facade. He watched her closely, noting every move, searching for any sign that she suspected something, but Emily remained elusive, never letting her guard down. Michael knew he couldn't confront her directly, not yet. Any rash action would only accelerate his downfall. He needed to play along, pretend that he was still in the dark, while secretly preparing for the final showdown. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Michael deliberately kept his tone light and casual when he asked, "How did the meeting go? Everything according to plan?" Emily looked up from her plate and smiled, as if he had asked the most ordinary question in the world. "Yes, everything went smoothly," she replied. "The partners are pleased, and we discussed all the details. Now it's just a matter of signing the papers, and we can move forward." Michael nodded, keeping his expression neutral, even though his insides churned with anger. He knew that behind her words lay nothing but deceit, but he couldn't afford to let her see his growing distrust. The next day, Michael decided it was time to take action. He contacted a private investigator he had worked with before. The investigator, an old acquaintance named Tom Harris, was a seasoned professional who never asked unnecessary questions. Michael explained the situation, handed over the evidence, and asked Tom to dig up everything he could about Jack Wells and his connection to Emily. A few days passed before Michael received the first results from Tom. What he learned was even more unsettling than he had imagined. Jack Wells was far more dangerous than Michael had realized. He had multiple fake identities and had been involved in similar schemes in the past. Schemes that ended with the mysterious deaths of his partners. Jack was a predator who always managed to escape unscathed. As for Emily, Tom confirmed Michael's worst fears. She had been involved in the plan from the beginning. Her meetings with Jack had started even before their move to Asheville. Together, they had devised a strategy to take over Michael's assets and prepare for his disappearance. Now that Michael held all the cards, he knew the moment of truth had arrived. He couldn't wait any longer, couldn't sit idly by while his life unraveled. It was time to act, and he needed to do it decisively. Michael began to plan his final move. He knew he couldn't simply go to the police. The evidence was circumstantial, and his enemies were too clever. He needed to lure them into a trap, force them to reveal themselves, and do so in a way that left them no way out. The game was nearing its climax, but this time, Michael was in control. Michael knew his plan had to be flawless. Any mistake could cost him his life. He spent countless hours contemplating how to lure Emily and Jack into revealing their intentions, without realizing it would be their last opportunity. In the end, he decided that the best bait would be a major deal. The very deal they had both been anticipating. A deal so lucrative they couldn't resist. Michael approached Emily with the proposal, pretending to be unaware of her deceit. He told her about an incredible offer he had received from an investor in Los Angeles. The deal involved selling a significant portion of the assets they jointly controlled for a sum far above their actual value. Emily was immediately interested, her eyes lighting up with excitement. She quickly agreed to meet with Michael and the investor to discuss the details. But there was no investor. Michael had fabricated the entire story, to draw his enemies into a trap. He coordinated with Tom Harris, who devised a plan to catch Jack and Emily red-handed. Tom set up hidden cameras and microphones at the meeting location, an abandoned country house where the negotiations were supposedly to take place. On the day of the meeting, Michael felt a mix of nerves and determination. When he arrived at the house, Emily was already there, and her eagerness didn't escape his notice. A few minutes later, Jack pulled up, exuding the same cold confidence that had always unnerved Michael. The three of them sat down at the table, and Michael began outlining the details of the fictitious deal. He could see the greed in their eyes as he spoke of the money to be made. As the conversation reached its peak, Michael pretended to hesitate, suggesting they go over the plan once more. Then, unexpectedly, Jack made his move. He suggested simplifying the deal by removing Michael from the equation entirely. His words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Michael knew the moment had arrived. "We both know, Michael, that you're out of the picture," Jack said with a slight smirk. "It's time for you to step aside and let those who can manage this business take over." Emily didn't argue. Instead, she supported Jack's suggestion, proposing they discuss the details later without Michael. That was when Michael played his trump card. He slowly stood up, opened a folder, and laid out copies of the diary entries, phone records, and all the evidence he had gathered. "You thought you had it all figured out, but you forgot one thing. I'm always one step ahead," Michael said, his voice calm yet resolute. "Right now, the police have this place surrounded. You have two options: confess and make a deal, or fight and lose everything." Jack's eyes flickered with panic, and he reached into his pocket, clearly intending to pull out a weapon. But before he could act, police officers burst through the door, called in by Tom. Jack was swiftly disarmed, while Emily, realizing the game was over, simply bowed her head in defeat. Michael stood there, watching as the officers led them both away. His heart pounded in his chest, but for the first time in months, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It was over. He had survived the trap they had set for him. He was finally free. Months had passed since Michael had exposed Emily and Jack's plot. The life that once felt foreign and full of deceit now belonged to him again. But despite his victory, the shadows of the past still lingered. Michael knew he needed to close this chapter once and for all to truly move on. Michael had taken over as president of the company Jack Wells had tried to steal. With all the assets under his control, he used his new position to strengthen the business and erase any trace of Jack's influence. Yet, every deal he made and every success he achieved reminded him of the heavy price he had paid. Emily was in prison, awaiting trial, and Michael couldn't stop thinking about her. Despite everything, he felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and regret. One evening, while Michael was working late in his office, he received a call from Tom Harris. The detective informed him that Emily wanted to see him before the trial began. It was unexpected, but Michael knew he needed to face her one last time to find closure. The meeting took place in the prison where Emily was being held. She looked worn out, but her eyes still held the same determination they always had. When Michael sat down across from her, they both remained silent for a moment, simply staring at each other. "I know you're not here just out of curiosity," Michael finally said. "What do you want to tell me?" Emily sighed and looked away. "Michael, everything I did it for us," she began. "I thought we could start a new life if we could just get rid of the past. But I was wrong. Jack, he manipulated me, and I let him, but I never wanted to hurt you." Michael studied her, trying to gauge how sincere she was. He felt a pang of pain, but knew he couldn't trust her again. "You betrayed me, Emily. You betrayed our trust, our love," he said quietly. I tried to understand why you did it, but I'm done searching for answers. The only thing that matters now is that I'm free, and I won't let you or anyone else destroy my life again." Emily nodded, accepting his words. She knew this was the end. "I hope you find happiness, Michael," she said, her voice laced with genuine regret. "I hope you can move on." Michael stood up and looked at her one last time. "Goodbye, Emily," he said, and walked toward the exit, feeling his soul lighten with every step as he left the weight of the past behind. Back home, Michael realized that he had finally let go of the part of his life that had caused him so much pain and suffering. He knew that a new chapter awaited him, one that he would write himself, without lies or betrayal. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his future was truly in his own hands. And so ended the story of Michael Rivers, a story of betrayal, struggle, and rebirth. With all the moves made and the cards laid bare, he could now start his new life with a clean slate.